Good morning, church family. This is being recorded for Sunday, July 5th, 2020. And a very interesting, challenging year continues. The elders absolutely hated to have to make the decision to postpone or cancel worship, suspend worship for the next 3 Sundays. It's not a decision that we wanted to make, but I'm very much at peace that that was the right decision. Just out of an abundance of caution, not wanting to take a chance on someone else catching COVID-19. Feel really bad for Dennis, who tested positive. I was hoping for a different result from that. He feels bad too, but it could have happened to any of us, could have been any of us. He has no idea where he contracted the virus. So possibly at work, but we just don't know. So we're going to hang in there through these 3 weeks. It will be a total of 13 weeks that we missed worship together. That's a quarter of the year. I hope that's all that we have to miss. We'll hang in there through these 3 weeks and then get back together again. And again, it will be very special. And I think we're all learning to appreciate being together that much more. So please stay safe. Take precautions, respecting people's distance, wearing masks, those kinds of things. And look forward to being back together again. Well, this is the holiday weekend, the 4th of July, typically Independence Day. Lots of debate about our freedoms being taken away or losing them through this pandemic and through other things that are going on. All kinds of things in the news about people destroying statues and monuments that they have no idea of the history of, and it's, I think, tragic in a whole lot of ways. But our independence, our freedoms came at a terrible cost. Our freedom from sin cost Jesus his life, so freedom's not free at all. I think it's very interesting, and I would encourage you to read what the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence went through. It's very interesting history, and they all paid a very high price as well. I'm not going to take the time to read through a lot of that, but as I talk about not independence today, but our dependence upon God, let me just share with you one paragraph that kind of summarizes what those 56 went through as a result of their seeking independence from England. It says 5 of the 56 were captured by the British and tortured. 12 had their homes ransacked, looted, confiscated by the enemy, or burned to the ground. 17 lost their fortunes. 2 lost their sons in the army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 lost their lives in the war from wounds or hardships inflicted by the enemy. So those 56 signers all suffered a great deal. They all paid a very high price for independence and for freedom. I want to share with you today, and I'm beginning a series of summer stories for the summer. Is what I had planned to do, so I'm going to continue that. Obviously, these first 3 we'll all see in a recorded message. I will continue recording them for those not yet comfortable attending. But on July 26th, we'll get back together, and those who come can hear it live. So if you want to turn with me to Daniel 3, I'm going to start this series with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Many of you very familiar with the story, and I'm going to go as quickly as I can so the recording is not too long. But it's in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel and some of his friends have been taken into captivity in Babylon. They are serving the Babylonian government there and doing a great job. And this story really tells us a great deal about the power of dependence upon God. So as we celebrate our independence, I just want us to be thinking about our dependence and our need of God. Well, in Daniel 3, in the first 6 verses, and I'm not going to take the time to read all of it, but you can hit the pause button and do that. In verses 1 through 6, King Nebuchadnezzar just gets full of himself. He builds his giant statue, and he says, everybody bow down and worship. When you hear the band play, then get down, worship and all. And it's not a suggestion, it's an order, and it wasn't healthy to go against the king at all. Well, there are some tattletales around, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego defy the order. They do not bow down. They're not worshiping the king. They're not worshiping his statue. In Daniel 3 and verse 12, we read this. It says, there were some Jews whom, and these are some of Nebuchadnezzar's leaders tattletelling on the other three. It says, there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Well, Nebuchadnezzar hears that report and he's ticked off. He's just very, very angry about the whole thing. So he calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in. He says, hey, guys, I'll give you a second chance. Here's the deal. He says, I'll have the band strike up and play again. When they begin to play, you bow down and worship, and all is forgiven and everything's okay. But if you don't, you'll be thrown into the fire, into the fiery furnace. And then his arrogance becomes all too obvious in verse 15. He says, if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I gotcha. You're trapped. You don't bow down. You're going to die. You're going to burn. And no God of yours will possibly be able to save you from my hand. Well, the verses 16 through 18 to me are really the highlight. Just so powerful. These three men in their dependence, their trust in God, make an amazing statement. And I just think it's one in all of our Bibles that ought to be highlighted and underlined, and one that we know very well. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I gotcha. When the band plays, bow down or burn. And there's no escape. No God can save you. Here's their response to that arrogant statement. Verses 16 through 18, they say, says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego say, hey, king, God will save us. Even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. We trust him. That's the way it is. So, whatever you need to do, you can do. Obviously, the king didn't like that response at all. He's royally ticked off by that statement, thinking that there's no way they can escape. So as you read verses 19 through 27, the king orders the furnace heated up 7 times hotter. Soldiers come, they tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They take them to near the fiery furnace. The fire is so hot that it kills some of those who are supposed to throw them into the furnace. The 3 men are thrown into the furnace. As King Nebuchadnezzar watches, he sees a 4th person, and they're walking around within the furnace. He jumps up. He calls them in to come out to him, and they come out. They don't smell like smoke. There's not a hair anywhere on them that is singed. Their clothes are not burned. It's an absolutely incredible miracle and an incredible rescue of these 3 individuals who totally put their trust in God. King Nebuchadnezzar, God will save us. He can do that. Even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to you because we worship him and him alone. And Nebuchadnezzar sees this miracle. They're not burned. They're not killed. The soldiers die, but these 3 do not. They are brought out. And here's what is said to them at that point. In verses 28 through 30. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. In verse 15, he says, I'm going to throw you in if you don't bow, and what God can save you? A very arrogant statement. He sees this miracle that God does indeed save them, and then he says, no other God can save in this way. And then he promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into even greater leadership than what they had prior to that. Great story. Not just a kid's story. I think there's a ton there for all of us to apply and to learn. So let me share some lessons that I see in this. You know, it's I think in many ways a crazy time, and I need to pick a different word than crazy, but it is crazy. 2020's been a crazy year in so many ways with the pandemic. Now with all the social unrest, with all these different things that are going on, it's been interesting to say the least. But the first big lesson that I see in this story is that God is sovereign regardless of the results. He is able to save. He is able to rescue us. We just need to stay dependent upon him. He may rescue us when we're in tough situations. He may not, but he's in charge. He's God. We're just puny little mortal human beings. His kingdom will come. His plan will be carried out. We just need to thoroughly depend upon him no matter what goes, no matter what comes down. What Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, Nebuchadnezzar, our God is able to save. He will save us, in fact. We believe that. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. God's sovereign. We just need to trust in him completely. I think a second big lesson is to suffer well. If we're going to suffer, and I don't know what you count as suffering. You know, we went through those 10 weeks without worship. Now we go through 3 more weeks. Until fairly recently, a lot of us didn't even know anybody that had corona. We hear all this, the death numbers, the cases, all of that. Well, a lot of us didn't even know anybody, but now I think we do. So I'm not sure what you count as suffering, but I just think we need to suffer for the right reasons. Let me share with you from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verses 18 through 20. And Peter's writing to young Christians, and much of what he writes about is suffering. And here's what he says in chapter 2 and verses 18 through 20. This is interesting for a number of reasons, but it says, Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if a man bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. Peter just saying, you know what? Suffer for the right reasons. If you're going to suffer, then suffer well. Suffer for doing good. If you do bad and terrible things and you're punished for that, you had it coming. So there's nothing real commendable about that. But if you're doing all the right kinds of things and you're suffering for that, you know, God appreciates that. That's commendable. I also want to share with you Paul's words from 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verses 7 through 10. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. We think it was his eyesight being blinded when Jesus appeared to him. We don't know 100% for sure. But in this chapter, he says 3 times he asked for that thorn in the flesh to be removed, and Jesus' answer was no. And here's what he says. To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassing great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I have to love that. Jesus said, Paul, no, my grace is sufficient. You'll get through this. You'll deal with it. Paul says, you know what? When I'm weak, then I'm strong. When I'm weak, that's when I'm really dependent upon God. When I'm feeling all strong and full of myself, like Nebuchadnezzar, that's just arrogance. That's just trouble, because I'm not relying upon God in times like that. Tough times certainly make us, or certainly give us the opportunity to be more dependent upon the Lord, and I think that's a good thing. So if you're going to suffer for the right reasons. If you get sick, usually that's nobody's fault. We just need to try and get through it. But spiritually, certainly, if we're suffering, let's suffer for the right reasons. A third big lesson I see in this story in Daniel 3 is that deliverance can be delightful to you and to others as well. What a story Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to share after that. Their deliverance was amazing. Their deliverance was just incredible. So to be able to tell that story, to say, we trusted, he threw us in the furnace, thought we were goners for sure, didn't even feel the heat, didn't singe a hair on our head, no, didn't smell like smoke, none of that. An angel appeared, walked us through it. Nebuchadnezzar calls it. What an incredible story that is. Now, maybe your deliverance is not near as dramatic as that, but God has brought you through some tough times. God has helped you through some difficulties, and possibly other people need to hear that because they're going through the same sort of thing. So if you're tested and God brings you through, it's a story worth telling. You can tell people the beauty of that, the wonder of God's deliverance, and the beauty of being dependent upon God, of trusting in Him, of exercising your faith, and seeing God answer those prayers in a wonderful way. I think that's appealing to other people. We're not here just for ourselves. We're cognizant of our God, of Him working in our lives. And I think it's appealing to people to hear that there truly is something beyond us. A fourth lesson, and this is the final one, and I just think this is huge. It simply stated, it's that trust is not trite. It's so easy to express trust in God in such a trite way. I hear preachers or pastors say trust, and they don't say it just like this, but it comes across like trust God and everything will be okay. Oh, really? In the midst of terrible sufferings, you say stuff like that and you just sound like a preacher? No, trust is not trite at all. We do need to trust God. We do need to be dependent upon Him. And know that whether we live or die, whether everything turns out okay now or not, God's kingdom will come. We will live forever in the kingdom with Christ and eventually with God. That kind of trust is not trite. The trust that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego displayed was not trite. That was powerful beyond description. So our trust in God on a daily basis through everything that we face is not trite at all. Let me share 4 or 5 verses with you. In Psalm 20, in verse 7, it says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Powerful verse. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is very familiar to many of you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. In all your ways acknowledge Him. In all your ways display that dependence upon Him. In Isaiah 26 and verse 3, it says, "You will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast because he trusts in you." And then in Romans 8, verse 31 and 37, Paul writes, "What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us," because we're trusting in him and God comes through on our behalf. And then Psalm 33 and verse 12, the first part of the verse, it says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." And I know in many ways it's getting harder and harder to tell that God is our Lord in the United States. There are many people who are godless, many people who are not depending upon God, many people who are trying to declare their independence from God. That doesn't work very well at all. Through this pandemic, through the cultural changes taking place, through everything going on, I think we clearly need to declare more of our dependence upon God and get back to many of the values that this nation was founded upon, a Judeo-Christian ethic, so many biblical principles that were used in the founding of this nation. So this Independence Day weekend, I just want to encourage you to renew your dependence upon God, your trust in him, your faith in him, because no other God can save in this way. Absolutely no other God can save like our God saves us. So again, God bless each and every one of you. I hope these 3 weeks pass very quickly for you. We can be back together again. If I can do anything to help or to serve, I'd be more than happy to visit. I can wear a mask. Many people have said I look better with one on anyway. Whatever I can do to help you through this time, I would be glad to do that. Stay dependent upon God, trust in him, exercise your faith. There is nothing trite about that at all. So God bless one and all. Bye for now.